And I now give the floor to His Excellency Daniel Jean, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Canada.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to appear before you today to deliver these remarks on behalf of the Government of Canada in this, the 70th anniversary of the United Nations. As a founding member of the UN, Canada played a constructive role in drafting the Charter and creating this organization before, during, and after the 1945 International Conference in San Francisco. There can be little doubt that over the last 7 decades, through this assembly, other UN bodies, and the myriad of agencies, funds, and programs associated with the UN, this institution has often helped to improve the lives and prospects of people around the world. It has done so even as member states and the UN itself have struggled to realize the organization's most fundamental aspirations. And since that time, Canada and Canadians have been steadfast supporters of the United Nations and deeply engaged in its work to deliver results for the benefit of our common future. One of the ways in which the UN led the way in its early years, and in which it continues to light the path ahead, has been in the vital area of international development. Canada is proud to support in word and deed the commitments of the 2030 Agenda. This organization and the international community it represents deserves our praise for aiming to eliminate poverty on a global scale. It is an objective that will require innovative new approaches and new partnerships. We will also need to promote fundamental freedoms, the rule of law, and accountable governance in those parts of the world where these critical building blocks for sustainable development are weak or absent. Canada looks forward to collaborating with others to sustain the momentum already underway as a result of the Millennium Development Goals and to move forward with renewed determination. The Government of Canada has identified maternal, newborn, and child health as a priority for development, in support for which we've committed $3.5 billion over the next 5 years. There has been progress, to be sure, but there remains much to do so. Canadian welcomes the inclusion of maternal, newborn, and child health in the 2030 Agenda as a means of following through on the commitment made under the 2010 G8 Muskoka Initiative, the Saving Every Woman, Every Child Summit in Toronto in 2014, and the renewed global strategy for women's, children, and adolescents' health. As the international community commits to implementing the 2030 Agenda, one of the most critical questions we still face is how to finance the Sustainable Development Goals. While current official development assistance will retain its important role, current and projected levels fall well short of the trillions of dollars required to implement these goals. We need to find new ways to blend financing from donors, foundations, the private sector, and other sources to fill this gap. The Global Financing Facility in support of every woman, every child is an excellent model of how the private sector can be brought on board to collaborate with national governments to sustainability finance, maternal, newborn, and child health initiative. The additional investment generated through the GFF and other innovative financing mechanisms will set the course for increasing funding from the current billions of dollars allocated for development finance to the trillions required if we want to achieve the post-2015 agenda. Canada will continue to play a leading role in helping to establish these mechanisms to secure sustainable financing and leverage the expertise and resource of the private sector in support of the development outcomes.
Humanitarian assistance is especially important as development progress can be wiped out overnight by natural disasters, by political violence, by international conflicts or crises having to do with acute food insecurity or the spread of disease. In planning the first ever Global Summit on Humanitarian Assistance next May, we must all vigorously renew our determination to respect international humanitarian law, to protect civilians, and to strengthen resilience when faced with possible crises, particularly making sure that national governments will be well equipped to deal with these crises. In our response to the needs of mankind, Canada always does its utmost to act with generosity, speed, and effectiveness in order to save lives, to mitigate suffering, and to preserve the dignity of the people most affected. In 2014, Canada increased its financial contribution to humanitarian assistance by 32% to meet the needs that are ever growing throughout the world, especially in Iraq, Syria, the Philippines, Ukraine, CAR, South Sudan, and Yemen. Similarly, Canada has played a key role in the speedy and effective action of the international community against the Ebola epidemic in some parts of West Africa. As we've done many times in the past, Canada has the capacity and the will to assist and deal with the refugee and migrant crisis that is currently affecting Europe. Since the establishment of the UN, the international community has been confronted with many situations requiring migration, voluntary and involuntary, of individuals. In some cases, as in the case of those trying to leave Syria, the problem is pressing. In other cases, it is part of a long-term phenomenon. We will work with our partners to overcome these difficulties, including by accelerating the resettlement process of Syrians and Iraqis in our own country this year. We know that Canadians will support efforts with the same spirit of generosity which has characterized the assistance that they've provided when others were in distress and affected by disasters. However, we cannot stop there. We must also take on together human rights violations and promote stability, peace, and prosperity in regions subjected to instability or violent conflicts. The United Nations, anchored in respect for the fundamental rights and freedoms of democracy and the rule of law, was established precisely for that purpose. Without the resolute and collective commitment of all member states for these principles, the edifying words of the preamble of the UN Charter risk simply becoming hollow and meaningless words. To quote the Prime Minister of Canada, "Wherever human misery abounds or grinding poverty reigns, or where the refusal of justice is systematic, there is not truly peace, only the seed of future conflicts." Canada continues to support a broad range of initiatives and measures established by the United Nations to promote peace and security, including the most recent efforts to combat terrorism and to identify new means to combat violent extremism. Innocent civilians are the ones that suffer the most from internal and international conflicts, as we see today in Iraq and Syria, where ISIS and other terrorist groups are sowing destruction. We are concerned by the resurgence of the Taliban in northern Afghanistan, by the scale of ambition of Daesh and their networks expanding in South Asia, in the Middle East, in North Africa, and in the Sahel, as well as their networks such as Boko Haram. The international community must continue to take significant measures to combat terrorism. With this situation, Canada's action encompasses not only its role in the military coalition, which is fighting against the immediate threat presented by Daesh, but also by efforts to provide humanitarian assistance. Canada will support ethnic minorities and religious minorities whose very existence is threatened. We commit to draw the attention of all regarding the consequences of sexual violence and other barbaric abuses perpetrated by ISIS against women and girls. Last July, we have met the SRSG for sexual violence, Ms. Zainab Bangura, who presented graphic and detailed conclusions of her assessment mission to the Middle East to members of the coalition combating Islamic State, which met in the city of Quebec. At this very meeting, Canada announced an additional financial contribution for the survivors of abuses of Daesh and in support of the essential work of Ms. Bangura. For a long time, Canada has been determined to work for self-responsibility of women and of girls and for greater respect of their rights in conflict situations. Therefore, we support a high-level consideration of implementation of the program on women, peace and security, as we have been doing the last 15 years. In other words, since the adoption of the first resolution on this question. Resolution 1325 adopted by the UN Security Council. Canada has played a key role in the global campaign to eliminate child marriage, early marriage, and forced marriage, a practice that is widespread and deleterious and which threatens the life and the future of girls throughout the world, with devastating consequences not only for them, but also for their communities.
Based international system must be preserved. International guarantees lose their meaning if rules are flagrantly violated. We must face these acute challenges to security and human rights, as in Iraq and Syria, as well as the abuse which followed in the wake of acts of aggression, such as the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the illegal annexation of Crimea, and continued interference in eastern Ukraine. This podium must not be used by leaders to subvert the principles on which this organization was established. This platform should be used to respond to and tackle these global threats. Two countries that persistently violate international standards in this realm, whose government oppress their own people and threaten their neighbors as well as global peace, are Iran and North Korea. Non-compliance over decades raised questions about ambition and intention. Verbal pledges or paper promises are not enough. There must be verifiable evidence of compliance and meaningful penalties for continued defiance. In this regard, while we appreciate the efforts of the P5+1, the real test of the Iran Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action or any similar agreement will be in its concrete implementation and independent verification. Actions speak louder than words. To that end, it is vital to support, sustain, and where necessary enhance the monitoring capabilities of the relevant agencies, such as the International Atomic Energy Agency, and ensure that verifiable deeds match conciliatory words. Nothing less than the credibility of the UN is at stake on such matters. As with any organization, it is vital for the UN to reassess what it does and how it pursues its goal in light of the remarkable change since its inception. Canada wholeheartedly supports the high-level review of peace operations. We cannot always rely on the instruments of the past to deal with the crisis of today. Freedom, peace, and stability pave the way to lasting prosperity. As we all know, the path to real sustainable development requires actions at many levels and with many partners. Private sector-led growth is a key ingredient for achieving this goal and for reducing poverty. Trade and investment are at the heart of this effort. This is why Canada is a firm supporter of a free and open trading system that fosters growth, contributes to development, and supports poverty reduction in all regions of the world. Perhaps no issue reminds us that we are all part of the one world than the threat of our collective well-being posed by climate change. Climate change is a global challenge requiring global solutions. Canada takes the challenge of climate change seriously and is working with all parties under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to reach an effective post-2020 climate change agreement at the COP21 meeting later this year in Paris. For Canada, an effective agreement must address both mitigation and adaptation. And most importantly, such an agreement must include a commitment to mitigations by all of the world's major emitters of greenhouse gases. On May 15, Canada announced its post-2020 climate change target, an economy-wide reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 30% below the 2005 levels by 2030. This is an ambitious target that is in line with other major industrialized countries and reflects our national circumstances, including Canada's position as a world leader in clean electricity generation. Canada recognizes that financing is a key part of the discussion, and moving forward with our partners, we will, as we've done in the past, continue to support international climate change financing. Canada has already pledged $300 million to the Green Climate Fund, in addition to previous investment of $1.2 billion we provided under Fast Start financing. This has already supported a number of beneficial projects in more than 70 developing countries. From the beginning, Canada has been one of the largest and most reliable financial contributors to the UN. Seen in the light of that support, it should come as no surprise that the Government of Canada and Canadians expect this money to be spent wisely and that the UN should be held accountable for its expenditures. As I said at the outset, the overarching aims of the UN since its creation have been remarkably consistent: to help achieve greater prosperity and security, to advance mutual respect, fairness, and good international conduct, and ultimately to inspire and sustain the hopes of people everywhere for a better future. With our friends and partners in the global community, we have striven to make this world a better place and to make the UN a better instrument to achieve these goals. We look forward to working together with other nations, as we have done for 7 decades, in the pursuit of this common purpose. Thank you.
أشكر نائب وزير خارجية
The Deputy Foreign Minister of Canada,